The 2nd of May, the Ukraine Media Center is on air. Your anchor is Svetlana Cheperenko. We are talking about the sowing campaign this year and the challenge of the agrarians are to see you, ma'am. The sowing campaign has kicked off. When did it start? And what are the first results of this campaign? Well, basically, in some regions of this country, the sowing campaign started actually in late February. Since March, however, we've been actively engaged almost in all the areas. Different crops are sowed in different times, so the campaign is still going on. We saw a week's pause when the first days of April saw cold weather, but it did not prevent us from sowing. It is safe to say that comparing the campaign of last year, the difference is actually about in the ballpark of 5%. So we are doing everything on time. 3 million hectares, as it was last year, have been sowed. This is the space that we planned for. A group of crops is very special, where we have actually finished, which is peas, sugar beets, and spring wheat. We've finished sowing those. For some crops, including sunflower and maize, we are seeing the half of the planned number. So we are actually at the equator line. The buckwheat, we have just begun to sow that. When we talk about the soybeans, about quarter to 30% have been sowed. This is actually what it must have been done. Everything is just okay. As for the spring crops, we plan to sow more than 30 million hectares. The figure is still relevant. 3 million of hectares have been sowed, and then also non-food crops we are doing just on time. The equator has been reached. The month of May is the time to cease sowing, and basically in all regions we will finish sowing. As for the cold weather onset, we are looking forward to some cold weathers coming our way. The beginning of May, do you think this will affect the harvesting results? It's not about cold weather. We saw some temperatures at the beginning of April. It did not actually affect the campaign globally because many crops have not been sowed by that time. And those that had been sown, they were at the point of vegetation, so these crops did not see any effect nationally. Now, when we look into the cold weather spell that we saw the other day, unfortunately, it has had some negative adverse effect in some regions, not all over the country, but we have got some information that in Cherkasy region and Dnipropetrovsk region, that is the central part of Ukraine, these have been affected by the onset of cold weather, where the crops were vegetating, including the barley, the spring barley in particular. These crops have seen the waves of adverse effect. Will it lead to the complete death of the crops? It's difficult to say now. For sure, we saw the end of the vegetation and the weakening of the crops that had been sowed, but we still need about a week's time to see whether the plants have enough energy to reinvigorate and grow further. This onset of cold weather will affect the final results. It is easy to say that we will not see the result that we have planned for, but it's complex to say what the results will be. What is the share and division of the crops compared to last year? As for the soybeans, winter and winter crops, experimental crops, do you think that farmers will play with those? Something that is unorthodox for Ukraine. Basic, global change has not been seen in Ukraine because physically it is difficult to do. Every agrarian producer picks up a special machinery. They take care of the so-called agrarian change of crops. And cardinally, you can't initiate changes year in or year out, but there are some trends affecting what I would call the adaptation of crops. What we see this year is the likely growth of the maize that will be sowed as compared to the soybeans. Why? The last year saw that the profitability of maize for 1 hectare compared to soybeans is higher. The prices are quite higher and attractive vis-a-vis soybeans. Internationally speaking, the prices have gone down. And again, it's not impossible to say that we will stop sowing soybeans, but we can safely say that maize will see the increase of 10 to 15%, and correspondingly soybeans will be less sowed by 10 or 15%. Other crops, the difference will be from 3 to 5%, which is very low. We've seen the decrease of the areas of sugar beets going down up to 15 to 20%. The area per se is not that big. Last year we sowed 260,000 hectares compared to 210,000 hectares this year. So the difference is about 50,000 hectares. The reason for that is that we have seen some quotas, some restrictions on the exporting of sugar beets to Europe, so the markets will not be available. This explains for the 20,000 square acres decrease. A new trend this year, perhaps, is the deregulation of what I will specifically define as non-food help. It's not about cannabis per se, it's industrial cannabis that has been deregulated altogether. If you want to grow this, you have to apply for this to be registered in the National Register. We expect the grow results here. Last year, the maximum was about 2,000 square hectares. We are likely to see 3,000 to 5,000 hectares of cannabis being sold. About 20 entities have registered, defining the fact that they will grow. So we expect the areas to grow in these areas. As for the other areas, we have seen that the government is likely to support some areas. For example, the cotton. Indeed, cotton is the crop of the future, and you are right. The government has taken a decision for 3 regions, Odessa, Mykolaiv, and region. The farmers that will engage in growing cotton will be subsidized in terms of 10,000 hryvnias for 1 hectare. Why are these regions selected? Because the temperatures are very favorable there, and these regions, it makes sense to grow cotton in these southern regions. We expect that the experiment sowing, the testing ground, we've seen some expertise here about 50 years ago. So the testing sowing will take place in these regions. Last year, we experimented with those crops. You see, to see the future for a specific sort of a crop, you need to have a 2-period of testing. Last year saw very positive results. We will scale up these cultures. Now, if we see positive results for the second year running, plus the government support, we can say that starting 2026, the cotton crops will grow exponentially. And it'll grow in terms of processing and growing. So we've brought in the seeds for the cotton, and we expect the results. All of us are optimistic about commercializing these crops. As for the bioethanol, starting yesterday, the Ukrainian fuel must contain the European norms of spirits, including the Ukrainian petrol. Are the Agrarians ready for such a scenario? The major crop to grow bioethanol is maize, which is to say that we've got enough of these crops and the processing capabilities. More than 25 million tons were grown in Ukraine. The source material for bioethanol will be available. There will be no problem there. Indeed, the processing is now actively growing. We see a lot of plans to grow the facilities of processing the maize. Now, this year, we can safely say that the domestic production of bioethanol will cover full scale for the need of the domestic need and demand for bioethanol and for the petrol in general. We are talking about dozens of processing facilities. The businesses saw the signal and they are ready to implement such demand, and the demand will be met with the supply. You have mentioned the fact that the sugar beet has been going down in terms of sowing. What other regulations are affecting these areas? Everyone understands that today the autonomous trade preferentials introduced by the European Union are effective till 5th of June. Everyone is doing their best for this policy to continue. But within this policy of free trade, there are quotas. We've mentioned sugar beets. The quotas are there, and the markets responded correspondingly. We're talking about 250,000 tons. It was easy for us to export as much as 500,000, but the quotas are conditioning our results. We also have some quotas on honey. Of course, it's not directly related to the areas of arable land, but it does not affect the sowing campaign. We've got some quotas on poultry and eggs. So since the area of cattle growing, it is affected by the crops that are sowed. There are some grains, including oats. This is a niche product, I would say, as other peeled grains. As for the wheat, currently, within these preferentials, we don't see any restrictions. So the direct effect as of today, has affected the sugar beets in the first place. The other sowing areas and the sentiment of the farmers are not directly affected by the conditions of the European Union's politics. Today, it makes sense to talk about demining. How has that affected the sowing campaign? And do you actively engage in private enterprises? Do they actively engage the demining facilities? About 285,000 hectares last year were reviewed in terms of the need for demining. These are substantial areas that we are talking about, and they have been returned into the arable lands. They will be sowed by Ukrainian farmers, including Mykolaiv and Kherson regions. For this year, and I will tell you the latest statistics, we have planned 65,000 hectares to be demined. Out of these, 11,600, about 20%, have been monitored and reviewed, and they have been returned to the sowing capacity. So basically, within the territories controlled by the Ukrainian government, the majority of the areas will be sowed. It is not our full understanding when we talk about the occupied territories. There is no access to that because the territories under temporary occupation are quite large. But what we do and where we can do the demining, the farmers are sowing. That is a very good for the food security of this country. Why is it that we are moving that fast in spite of the complicated period? We've got dozens of operators in demining activities supported by the private enterprises and international community. There is also a government program that makes up for 100% of the demining activities. So there are no problems in that area. Indeed, the major challenge is labor, because not always we have available personnel to do demining. This is an extremely dangerous kind of work, but all the preconditions and the infrastructure is there for the areas to be used in terms of agriculture. Last year's campaign saw the shortage of workforce. What is the situation? I don't think the labor force has been growing. Perhaps you have found out other ways to settle the issue. How does that affect the sowing campaign and the harvesting campaign? Everyone understands that while the war is raging on, the deficit of labor will always be a challenge. This is a complex balancing act for the facilities to keep on working. We understand the needs of the armed forces as well. What we have achieved, however, in these difficult times is that fact that the government will provide exemption. Now we are talking about a 1 year's time of which is a cycle of the personnel not to be called up, not to be drafted. So once we have enough tractor drivers this year, it means that these people will be harvesting the crops next year. So 12-month period is a very positive process, and it enables us to provide enough workforce. Now about 3,000 facilities have had exemptions for their labor force to be exempt from the service in the armed forces. Apart from the weather challenges, we are doing quite all right. The balance is quite difficult, but we have succeeded in continuing sowing campaign. As for the technical resource, the silos, the machineries, are these available? We know that silos and elevators are being hit, including the machinery in the fields. What's the situation there? We must adapt. One of the ways to adapt and the tools to settle down this challenge are the temporary warehouse. The ministry, with the help of international community, have distributed machinery and warehouse facilities, millions worth of dollars, and we know the needs. We have had requests from the farmers by the UN Food Organization. We have also dealt with the Kherson region. We are thinking about Sumy region in terms of providing the mobile means for keeping the grain with the so-called mobile sleeves that can be set up and then taken out to make sure that not all the crops are harvested and then stored in one place when they have seen the kamikaze attack. We must store grains in different places. In other areas that are at the larger distance from the front line, they are operating as they used to do. They are energy supplied, and the volumes are available there. We see that they are also building new facilities. This is the part of the government-run program where the agrarians will be compensated in terms of 25% of their facilities while they build the domestic silos and the elevators. They will see 25% of compensation. Of course, the war has brought a number of challenges, but we are doing our best to overcome them. Thank you very much, sir, for your detailed answers. We've been talking about this year's campaign of sowing. We've been talking to Tovarz Vysotskyi, the first Deputy Minister of Agrarian Policy. Media Ukraine Center will resume our work on Monday. Stay tuned.